May I request all of us to please mute ourselves? Thank you all for joining us today for a canteen talk that today is February 21st. And the canteen talk that we are going to organize is basically going to be featuring some of our distinguished alumni. I would like to request you to please consider renaming yourself on Zoom, as Shakti was suggesting, like my name and then my faculty and then batch year. You may want to introduce yourself on chat. For an example, you can put your name, CEPT batch, current location, current profession, title, company where you work if you wish to. And we request you all to please keep yourself muted for the entire duration. And please type in if you have a question in the chat box, and facilitator Shakti will prompt to mainly prompt with your question. And when she prompts, please unmute yourself and ask her question. Most of you know that CEPT Alumni Association of Americas was launched in June 2020, and we registered the organization. We have the website up. I just would like to give this brief introduction so that we keep it standard all the times. As new people keep on coming in, we would want to invite them, welcome them, and also inform them about the mission that you can see here is to really talk about CEPT alumni in the Americas. But obviously, we have our roots, we have our connections, and we want to really make it a fruitful discussion for everybody. So these are our broad goals. And point is to connect people. We have a common thread to see if at all we can connect professionally, connect socially. Depends, everybody has different need. And I think we would want to provide that cohort, that ecosystem for us to connect, share our experiences, share professional experiences as well, and talk more about it. So far we have 131 CEPTians registered to CEPT AAA, CEPT Alumni Association of Americas. And if at all you have not yet done, please register. These are the links. I will be also posting some of these links while we are today on this canteen talk. We have, for professional interactions, we use LinkedIn, and we have 130 members. For social interactions, we use Facebook, and we have 119 members. And WhatsApp we use for many different kind of communications, as you all have seen, but mostly to announce whatever is happening in CEPT Alumni Association of Americas. However, I think our interest is that many people have asked earlier, oh, what if I want to connect to people and all? So I think Facebook and LinkedIn are those kind of two good platforms. Most of us use it. If not, let us know. We can find other opportunities to help you as well, other ways to help you as well. This is basically the spread of 131 members across decades. And you can see that 90s and 2000s and 2010s, there are a little bit more numbers than we have in 60s, 70s, 80s, and so on and so forth. This is breakup over faculties. As you can see, architecture, planning, technology, and design. And this is the spread of our alumni across the United States and Canada. So we would love to invite you to contribute to CEPT AAA and in different ways by volunteering your time, sharing your knowledge, as well as in future, whenever it happens, donate money as well. And there are various ways, as you can see highlighted here, to contribute yourself. I would like to pause here and thank you all for being here, but most importantly, all the speakers and the facilitator who have agreed to kindly be a part of this discussion today. Kautilya Bai Gandhi, Anish Kumar, Samir Kumar, and Shakti Chibrawal. Shakti, I'll hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. First of all, I would like to welcome all of you for spending time with us and learning about the journeys of all the professionals here. I will start with introducing a little bit about myself. My name is Shakti. I'm from School of Architecture 2002 batch. I live in Greater Houston, Texas since the past 2 years. Currently, I work as an administrator for a small business, but I'm also learning softwares to get back to architecture. So my journey is a little different. When I was like, as a 20-year-old, I would have never imagined that the primary job that I would be doing would be taking care of the family, but it is. Back then, I despised the very institution of patriarchal society. Never imagined I would fall into it, but it was surprising that, and I don't regret it at all. So before marriage, I was very clear I would pursue architecture. 1 month into marriage, I had an opportunity. Both of us, me and my husband, we had an opportunity to travel the world, and we were very excited. We got to it, and we started following the footsteps of our ancestors and became a banjara. The biggest driving force was to experience the world. I always believed that to understand and know a place, you have to live in it and not just vacation a few days, and that made me more excited for experiencing new places, culture, new people, and that overpowered the desire to settle and also a little bit work. With every move, the settlement period is longer. It takes some time to settle, and by the time we would settle, we would move again. So I've lived in many places: Mumbai, Michigan, again Mumbai, Hyderabad, again Michigan, Singapore, New Jersey, Australia, and now finally Texas. And we finally decided to put down our roots, and we bought a home in Sugarland area, beautiful suburb in Houston. And throughout these travels, the major way I got connected to the outside world was various works. I took art classes for kids, so always connected somehow through the creative field. I did painting, I did sketching. I volunteered at various organizations, local libraries, school PTOs, Habitat for Humanity, Indian community associations. All those helped me get connected as well as feel achieved something and motivated. I also work as administrator, which I currently do. And now, since we are settled, hopefully, and my son being independent, I'm ready to accept more formal position in the field of architecture. I'm learning softwares, but will be available to work on projects probably related to sustainability, institution, housing, and yeah. So I would welcome you all, and I see a lot of people have already posted in the post in the chat their name, their year, and where they are from. I would request more of the people who keep joining to keep adding to it. And we have three distinguished speakers with us today. This time it is a little different. This is our fourth canteen talk, and we have three people from architecture background. Before, we have always had three people from different backgrounds, but this time, so it'll be really interesting to understand their journey. They started the same, but their journey went different. They took different turns, and how they have, what do they do now? So we have Kautila Gandhi from Architecture 71 batch, Anish Kumar 80 batch, and Samir Kumar from 93 batch. And we would like to go from the senior most to the junior most. And I would give this platform to Mr. Kautila Gandhi, FA 71. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. I would like to request you to unmute yourself, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Shakti, so much for and Vatsal and the CEPT Alumni to give me this opportunity to connect with all our fellow colleagues and the school buddies. I I hear that you have lived in so many places and you've traveled quite a lot, and I know that that is a fantastic thing. I would definitely encourage everyone to do that. I have done it myself. So I'm 71 batch. It was at that time 6 years course. I took 7 years to do that because I was sick in the first year, and I completed my
Oh,
studies in 78. So I started my journey basically in 78. So that's like 42 years now, almost. Uh, Went to work for initially for a construction company right after graduation to United Arab Emirates in Sharjah. It was a construction company, and everyone at that time was trying to market themselves in all the places. So they sent me to North Yemen, Sana'a. So Sana'a is, I don't know if many people know, it's kind of 2,000 meters above sea level. So although it's a desert, there's no rain, but it's beautiful climate, five 5 degrees maximum in the winter and 25 degrees maximum in summer. So it varies between 25 and 25 degrees centigrade. There was no doubt it was a very hostile climate there because there was a war going on between North and South Yemen. So between the bullets, shells, and all that, we were building 5-story and 6-story buildings for future. There were owners who didn't know what they will use that building, but they wanted to kind of put themselves before they find oil in Sana'a. Anyway, I lasted there for about a year. It was nice experience, but it was getting a bit too much. You see bullet holes in the cars every day, and you hear the sound of shells and all. And I managed to leave there. So in '79, I came to Denmark to study urban design. Copenhagen, one of the best cities I think in the world. Extremely nice city. And as a student, I explored the city while I was studying. I was a urban design course, and it was done by a professor, Jan Gale. I don't know many people. He has a lot of divisions all over the world, mostly San Francisco, New York. That's in US, several places, as well as in Europe. And it was a very nice experience, 1 year's study with Jan Gale, and then I finished that, and I got a little scholarship to go to Norway, about 6 weeks scholarship. That was lodging, boarding, and school, no cash money. But that 6 weeks became almost 20 years. So it was an interesting thing. I went there, I studied, I did that scholarship course, and then I met a few people. And at that time, Norway was transitioning from in the 70s. It was one of the or the early 70s. It was one of the poorest countries in Europe to become one of the richest country in Europe within 10, 15 years because it was pumping oil and gas money from the North Sea. So I was fortunate to work with the city of Oslo, where they were converting the old city, trying to retain that character and all that, but at the same time making it into a modern city with infrastructure, but keeping the built mass the same. So renovating and uh, even at that time in 80s, early 80s, downtown buildings, they didn't have any services. For example, they didn't have washrooms or toilets inside the units. They had to go outside and in that cold. So the whole thing was revamped, and I was very fortunate that I joined the team who were tasked to redevelop and revamp the whole inner city. I worked there for about 4 years. That was a fantastic experience. And then I joined with another young architect, and we decided to venture into something new. So we started working on a kind of a structure that can resist all kinds of natural hazards, such as a storm, floods, earthquakes. And we managed to design a small structure, which a kind of a generic hexagonal structure, an aluminum frame, which also can be used as a shelter, emergency shelter. And that became very popular at that time. And through the Norwegian AIDS organization, we were able to extend our or sell this, basically sell the structure to United Nations. And then we went to different countries and built pilot projects for wherever there was a catastrophe or something. So then instead of putting tents, they would buy these shelters, and then the shelters would be long lasting. So it worked out quite well. I traveled. I had a lot of traveling. Among other things, I also went to Afghanistan and Peshawar in Pakistan, where we built this kind of emergency shelter for the Afghan refugees and all that. So it went on. We did this for a couple of years, and I was said maybe I have to do something else. So we then in the meantime we went on entering an architectural competition for um, building a school of business school, Norwegian School of Business in Oslo, just outside Oslo, in a suburb of Oslo. And we won that competition. So it took about 3 years to detail design and build that school of architecture, school of business. I enrolled myself in that school of business while I was doing the construction work, and in that 3 years I also got my MBA. Of course, during this process, as in Europe, you have to learn the language in order to learn the culture and all this. So I learned the Norwegian language. I'm pretty fluent at Norwegian, I must say. So I speak Danish, Swedish, and Norwegian languages. It taught me. I mean, I had to learn it, otherwise you can't survive or you cannot get ahead. So it was working out quite well, and then we felt that now in 88, 89 there was a kind of the world economy was dwindling, and then I felt that there is something not going to go well. I took a break and I went over to something completely different, which is offshore design, like field designing offshore structures. So anything that is floating. So first I joined into oil and gas, oil rigs offshore. So it's a fantastic, it's a huge project, but all the time designed at a micro level, because every square centimeter is worth hundreds or thousands of dollars. So you take your time, design everything, and then you build this, and then the modules which are built all over the world, you bring them together in a yard and then pull them together to where the drilling site is. You drill it, and then basically each and every rig is manned with 200 to 300 people. So you build a very nice place for them to live, because everyone is moving there for 2 weeks. They work for 12 hours, but other 12 hours they have to socialize, do a lot of things, and not get lonely. So you kind of make it such a way that people can interact with each other, make a nice social environment and all those things. So, and it was a kind of a different kind of structure. It was stressed skin of steel and aluminium, and then you cover them with finishes. So it looks just like a regular hotel building or something, but it is completely built in a different way. And the cost is always an important factor. So you don't count how much steel or aluminum, but the cost factor is calculated by weight, like how many tons this rig is, and you can tell, okay, that then it will cost so many billions of dollars. Interesting project. I kept on doing that from 1888, 89, 88, 89, all the way up to, but in between, in 96, 97, I again took a little break. I came to South. I was brought over to Saudi Arabia by a Swedish company, and they were building palaces for this royal family, and it was a phenomenal experience. I can tell you this. We were on one side, we were building palaces which had no budgets whatsoever, no budget. You don't question. You just get the best things. And on the same patrons would be designing industrial or funding industrial building, where every cent was accounted for, and you have to cut down on the budget and all those things. The same guys, as when it came to their palaces, no budget. When they come to the business, it was like 100%. Anyway, it went on. It was a nice experience there as well. But unfortunately, then the Swedish company got sold to the local Saudi company, and then it was not very easy to work with the Saudis, I can tell you. So I came back. I continued with the offshore projects, and then I joined. I worked for practically all the large oil companies: ExxonMobil, Shell, Phillips, British Petroleum, Statoil, Norsk Hydro, and so on. Until and then that gave me a possibility to travel all over Europe. So my traveling was quite a lot of travel. It was like almost 100 flights a year. So it was extraordinary. It was a lot of traveling and being there. Uh, then in 2001, the Sable offshore project in Canada came along. ExxonMobil was the kind of the oil company, and they brought me over to Halifax, and that's where I am right now in Halifax, Atlantic Canada. And I worked for a couple of years, and we did two rigs in those 2 years. One was built in New Orleans, the other one was built locally here. And then this was a project for about 5, 6 years. But then after a couple of years, found out that the oil and gas was drying off. So I had like three options at that time. That was in the period 2002, 2003. Either continue with ExxonMobil and they had another project ready in Italy, or I go back to Norway and go back to that same offshore project, or I continue staying in Halifax. And the kids were growing. I mean, older. My eldest was about 15 years. The younger one was 12, and they both liked Halifax very much, and they were kind of happy here. So we said, okay, forget about. So I left the ship, say goodbye to ExxonMobil, and then I started here. And I didn't know anything what was going on here. So slowly I built a house first of all, and the construction company which built my house, I bought that construction company. I said, okay, that's my start. And then we built a lot of homes. I mean, over this period of 20 years, I built about 300 houses in Halifax. But in that process, I learned the tricks of trade and financing and all those things. So I we I bought raw land here, and then I put in the subdivisions, and I built about couple of hundred homes in the subdivisions which I developed. At the same time, we also bought raw land, and we did development agreements with the city. So I built apartment buildings and commercial properties and all that. So I was doing all that kind of from practically no money to get all these things going for myself. So today I have about a portfolio of 400 apartment units, a few commercial properties and all that. So now I'm enjoying managing those. And then at the same time, I'm doing some architectural work for other developers. So it's been an intel. I hope I have not overrun my time. I can go on and on and on, but it has been a good journey. I've managed to make a lot of countries my home, and I've managed to learn some languages, learn a lot of people, make friends all over the world, and I'm really happy. Shakti, I mean,
Wow, Kautilya, that was amazing. Thank you so much for sharing it with us. It was full of like adventure and so many stories, learning new languages, and the kind of work that you did. It was all so varied, extremely varied. So
yeah,
it
I was
was,
very fortunate. Yeah, thank you.
yeah. No, thank you so much for sharing with us. Next, I would like to invite Mr. Anish Kumar of 80 batch to talk about his journey. Anish bhai, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So that, Kautilya's journey is a very hard act to follow. I think it is really amazing what you have done in your life. And I'd love to come and see your subdivisions in Halifax and learn more about how all that happens and how all the offshore work. I mean, it's just amazing. So I put together a little slideshow because I don't have a very interesting story. And so I thought that maybe the pictures will help. So my journey, as it did for all of you, started in Ahmedabad, my professional life. Before that, before 1980, I grew up in different parts of India. My father worked for the railways, and so we moved quite often. I did some part of my schooling in Bombay and some part in Delhi. And then in 1980, I came to Ahmedabad. And Ahmedabad was a very, liberating experience for me. I never liked learning from books. I never liked the school system. I was never very good at it. I was never good at physics and chemistry and memorizing all that stuff. But Ahmedabad was all about learning from each other, and it was about learning by doing, and that was the most defining part of Ahmedabad. And I see that I have a friend here on this chat, Rajat, who I shared those 6 years with in Ahmedabad. He's from my batch. And, uh, um, we did stuff like, the thing on the left side is in the very first year, we had to make a model, a bridge that could carry your own weight. And the only things we were material that we could work with was mylar or gateway tracing and glue. And obviously mine didn't work very well, but it was fun all the same. So I finished Ahmedabad and I went to Bombay or Mumbai now. And I worked for Kamu Iyer, who ran a company called Architects Combined. He just passed away last month. And so Mr. Iyer was my mentor, my first boss, and everything that I learned in Ahmedabad was sort of part of what we did there. And I worked on this one building. I worked on many buildings, but this one is a building for the Spastic Society in Bandra Reclamation. And it was an amazing experience. I worked there for 2 years. This is a shot of actually the building. It looks like a model because that's really how we built things those days. I designed everything, and then with Stryer, and then we built a model, and then we went to site and we actually built it, and it was fun. But after doing it a couple of times, it wasn't enough for me, and I wanted to expand my role as a person. Not just doing individual buildings. I wanted to have more participation in the bigger picture. And so I came to Philadelphia in 1988 to study urban design at the University of Pennsylvania with Dr. John Lang. And, this was, and I still live in Philadelphia. So I came here in 1988 and I never left. It's been an incredible experience for me to be in this one city and to be connected to this one institution. And the way John Lang approached urban design was extremely expansive, and my world just exploded into sociology and behavioral science and politics and environmental science. And he considered all of those things part of the built experience, or the influences on how architecture happens and what buildings look like. And the University of Pennsylvania campus was a very unique campus because it wasn't like Cornell or one of the other closed campuses. This is an urban campus right in the middle of the city. The most iconic part of the campus is a street that you see in the picture in the middle. And Philadelphia looks like the slide on the right, the picture on the right, but it didn't look like that in 1988. It was quite a horrible place. Philadelphia was not in a good spot. It was bankrupt. There was crime all over the place. So we've been here through that journey since 1988. When I graduated, I started working for a company called Wallace Roberts and Todd, WRT as it's now called. And they had, at that time, a very sprawling planning practice. And that's what I really wanted to do, was to be part of the bigger picture And so I joined WRT in 1990, and worked there on a whole variety of projects. And it was just amazing. The breadth and depth of the types of engagement an architect could have in building places was quite incredible. Um, I worked. They sponsored me for my green card and so on and so forth. I worked there for a long time, and after about 10 years or so, things started to change a little bit. I wanted to come into my own, and I wanted to refine or narrow my practice from this very large scale, wide projects where I was working on architectural projects, and I was working on planning projects, policy projects. But I wanted to narrow the focus, and I got an opportunity to start my own studio at a company called Hillier. Hillier was a very large architectural firm that was, they and the founder of the company, Bob Hillier, felt that his company was very suburban focused. All their work was on the Route 1 corridor in Princeton and in New Jersey, and he wanted an urban focus. And he felt that if he had an urban design practice, like the kind of work that I was doing within his company, it would help move his company with the economy and the changes in the economy. So I joined Hillier, and it was an amazing experience of actually building my own practice. He gave me the opportunity to build my own studio. He said, go hire the people you want, go win the work you want, and I'll market you. I'll pay for everything. But all I ask is that you make a profit at the end of the day. So, that's a pretty simple but complex exercise. How do you run a company? How do you run a business within a larger company? And Hillier was about 400 people. And I grew my studio from just me and one other person that we started to about 8 people. And we did that. And the focus was twofold. We wanted to build stuff, but starting with the big picture. And it was a balance between public sector work and developer work. That went on very well for about 7 years or so. And then the economy started to change again. And as you know, in 2008, there was a huge recession. So on the heels of that recession, Bob decided to sell his company. He sold his company. And as he was selling his company, I got recruited by a company in Atlanta called Thompson Venturette Steinbach and Associates, TVS Design, as they call themselves now. And TVS was experienced, they are the leaders in convention center design. So they were finding that domestic clients were drying up, there was no money, but overseas there was a lot of work. And they had projects in all these countries that are shown in the dark olive color on this map. And all of their clients overseas were saying, before we let you build a big building, we want you to do a plan for the whole area around it. So I joined them as the head of their planning practice in Atlanta. And I worked in almost, not in all these countries, but I worked in Dubai. I worked, and when the crash happened, then Dubai obviously dried up. And so we pivoted to China. I worked in Vietnam, Indonesia, Chile. I did a project in Mumbai, which was very exciting. And so this journey went on for 5 years or so. And after that, the economy changed again. And overseas practice became harder for a company like TVS to sustain. And they felt that they just didn't have the bandwidth to compete with the AECOMs and those other large engineering firms. And it was getting very costly. Clients were paying less. So I was at a point again, just as I was when I was when I was recruited from Hillier, where the economy was changing and I had to reinvent myself. And so at that point, I felt that instead of reinventing myself as a designer and a planner, that maybe it's time to do something different in the real estate process. So architecture is, as you all know, is part of the real estate process, and it's one part of it. So I decided that I wanted to learn more about the business side of real estate. That how do deals get done? How does land get purchased? And all that stuff. And so I got an opportunity to join Amtrak in their real estate division. And they were looking for someone who could help them with be more strategic about their real estate decisions, because they were being reactive, that every time a property came up or had to be sold or bought, they were just reacting to what the company wanted. And the company wanted real estate to be more strategic. So I joined them as a planner, and I worked with them through their whole portfolio, realigning the portfolio, figuring out where their people are, what the stations are, where their offices are, their workshops, their factories. And I learned the business of real estate management from my boss there, who retired 2 years after I joined them. And then they offered me his position. So I became the head of Amtrak's real estate group, which I did for till I joined Penn. So it's back to full circle now. When I got this opportunity, Amtrak again started to change, and the job became less about growing the network, but became more about shrinking the network. And, as an architect, as you all know, I mean, coming from Ahmedabad, it's all about growth, right? You just want to build. You don't want to cut. You don't want to demolish. And it wasn't fun anymore. And Penn offered me an opportunity to come back, not as a student this time, but as an employee, to manage a 23-acre campus that they had built to incubate businesses. And so this was an opportunity for me to bring it all together, bring my architecture, my planning, my business management, all into one place. So this 23-acre campus called Pennovation Works is about 7 minutes from my home. And, it has about 250,000 square feet of built space and 70 companies that we support. So my job is to run the entire business, the Pennovation Works, and all aspects of it, including recruitment of tenants, leasing, construction, programming. And these are just some of the images of the types of things and companies that there are. They're all innovative companies. They're all companies that we curate. So we decide which companies can lease space there. And they're all in either life sciences or they are in robotics. Those are the two types of innovative companies that Pennovation Works supports at the campus. So that's sort of, my journey.
Thank you so much, Anish Kumarji, for sharing it. It was really wonderful, and you've done such variety of work, and the best part is that we could see all that culminating into the work that you are doing, all your past work. So that was really interesting. Thank you so much. And now I would like to request Samir Kumar to share his experiences with us. Samir,
wow, this is, I guess, I don't know how I would fare after these two amazing journeys, because not only is mine probably the least interesting of all, but it is also sort of diametrically opposite of what you guys have been up to, both Mr. Gandhi and Anish. I think listening to Mr. Gandhi, I felt like he had spread his wings and sort of possessed the world, the entire world under his wings. Anish bhai, you seem to have stayed in one location, but the expanse of experience and the expanse of the amount of real estate that you have touched seems pretty phenomenal. I, on the other hand, have had a journey where I have gone sort of into a little rabbit hole within the profession. I have focused deeper and deeper into a smaller and smaller part of the profession. So in a way, it could be interesting that we have been assembled together in this sequence. So I too have to rely on a slide presentation. So I'm going to share my screen. Sorry, just a minute. Okay. And interestingly, my journey in a way starts where Anish Bhai's journey ended, which is at Penn. I am from, I grew up in Baroda. My family is from UP. I was born in Bihar, so I sort of had this bit of a mixed bag in my cultural upbringing. But I come from a family, a very classic middle class family. We had no real arts in our home. There was no music being played. There was no, my mother did learn art, but when I claimed in 10th grade that I wanted to be an architect because I hated reading books, and I used to have these nightmares that I will be crushed under the weight of medicine, medical education books, because my family is full of doctors. So I figured out that I had to find a way out of it. And when I said that, no one in my family really knew what an architect meant, right? And this is like mid 80s. There wasn't a lot of knowledge about architecture. I didn't know what I was talking about either. I was just bluffing. But that bluff kind of maintained itself. And at the end of my 12th standard, I was fortunate enough that my parents had been so disheartened by my performance in my education that they allowed me to take entrance exam courses, right? So that I would at least make it into architecture school, because I wasn't going to make it into anything else. So I was lucky to find my way. I first started studying architecture at MSU Baroda. I spent a year over there. Didn't like it very much. It was not a very pleasant atmosphere over there. And I had some friends and a professor, Punita Mehta, who's the wife of Gemini, who prodded me that I should go to CEPT instead. And that is what made me join CEPT. And I started again. So I let go of that 1 year. I started from scratch in '93. And, it has been, it has been a journey of tremendous richness ever since, as you all very well know. Of course, Ekta here is my classmate. We've gone through ups and downs together. But I of course I graduated in 2000, right? So it took me about 7.5 years, primarily because I went on exchange to RPI Troy, which was an important component of me wanting to come back to the US to study further. But the more pertinent point about why I wanted to come and study in America was because at the end of my education in Ahmedabad, I felt that I had not, that my education had not prepared me to design in the world that we lived in. And by that, I mean that I felt, in mid 90s, when we would look at these magazines from the West, architectural magazines, and we would see all these projects by Renzo Piano and all. I think Kansai Airport was a big one. Like, these would be all this technology in there. The longest building in the world. Foundations are hydraulic jacks that keep the whole building level. The mechanical system informs the shape of the roof. And, having studied architecture for 6-7 years at that point, it felt like I knew none of this, that I was so far away from the technology of our times. While I knew how to build in brick and I knew how to build in concrete, I felt like I would be greatly disadvantaged if I set out into the profession without capturing the essence of, let us say, the zeitgeist, the spirit of the time, the current technology. So I specifically pursued courses that were about technology, and I ended up getting selected at Penn, who were offering a one-year program called Emerging Technologies in Architecture. And it was a program that was run by Peter McCleary, who was an old hand. He was the last remaining professor from, Louis Kahn and Lurie Collet's time. Most of the rest of the faculty at Penn had started transforming itself to follow the digital sort of transformation, what Columbia had brought upon. But this was one last sort of remnant of the old University of Pennsylvania, which still focused on the craft, right? The understanding of the physicality of architecture as much as other aspects of architecture. And I really I could not define it to myself, but what I realized after coming there is that I was looking for a greater initiation into the craft of architecture, the way our craft was practiced more currently. And Emerging Technologies in Architecture was a great program because it sort of gave me an alternate point of view of looking at the history of architecture. And it introduced to me the true sort of understanding of how structures on one hand, for example, that I had never understood in Loving Yesser's course, how that could be an underlying, how the knowledge, the evolving knowledge of structures for humankind could be a strong component of what shaped architecture, for example, or so it was eye-opening. It was really quite profound. However, it did not really prepare me for what was going to come ahead of me. Oh, this is just a few images of this kind of studios that we did, which were really about a lot of physical model making, a lot of kinetics, a lot of moving pieces. On the right-hand side, you see a bridge that I was working on, a pedestrian bridge that lowered and raised itself as the tide changes. At the bottom, you see an array of images of a deployable roof for a Roman theater, etc. So it was interesting. However, I graduated on 31st of August in 2000, which was exactly 11 days before 9/11 happened. And that completely changed whatever plans I had, right? I was already in love with this girl who I had met at Penn, who's now my wife. She was from New York. She insisted that we had to be in New York. 9/11 had completely crashed the market in New York. There was very little work to be found. I moved to New York a month after 9/11 in early October. And I was fortunate that one of my professors from Penn, who used to have this practice called FTL Design Engineering Studio, he offered me a temporary position. And it was because he specializes in fabric structures and lightweight architecture. And he had just been commissioned by the Port Authority to develop and build a covering over the 9/11 site, the entire ground zero, because they were afraid that the oncoming winter would hamper the rescue efforts, and they needed a full covering. They were thinking about it at that time. And so I was hired to work on that project, although that project never materialized. But I spent 2 years at FTL, and during that time, I was able to, of course, we were 3 blocks away from 9/11. So a lot of our efforts were around 9/11. What you see here is a rendering of another project we did for Ground Zero that never materialized. But one of the problems was that this construction site remained a construction site for so long, and the occupants around wanted something that would enable people to move around and stuff. So there were some structures like that. We ended up building a little memorial for the fire department, and this was something that our company sort of contributed. So all of this, the whole experience of 9/11 was very viscerally close to me. But I ended up learning a lot about the relationship between, let us say, material, structure, craft. These are drawings that I did. I saw these structures go up. I saw how, projects were managed. I ended up getting this really interesting opportunity to work on an airlock for the next generation of space shuttle for NASA. We were, airlocks used to be this like a tin can that would be attached to the space shuttle, but NASA was looking to reduce its real estate. So we were developing a fabric inflatable airlock where, and all of this, of course, did not go through because once Columbia disaster happened, NASA completely pulled out of all manned flights. So, but we developed sort of this concept. We did a prototype testing. It was a place where we had these interesting projects. This is a little aerotail for the back of a truck, right? Where, to reduce the drag behind trucks. We were developing this fiberglass skin that would remain closed with the door, but just before driving, the driver could crank and activate this aerotail, which would reduce the drag. And all of these are physical models that I would make myself with in the model shop, and we would solve all these interesting problems. This was work that we were doing with photovoltaics integrated, flexible photovoltaic cells integrated into fabric, which was really a development for the US Army that we were doing. And I spent a week at a tent company in Binghamton, New York, overseeing the development of this prototype that you see over there. So, it was kind of an interesting thing. It was a mixed bag of many, many different little things that were going on. And, the economy wasn't getting much better. This is around 2002, Iraq War, the drumbeat had started, and, it was not a pleasant time to be in New York. But, and so this company I was working for was in a bit of a financial trouble. We were on a pay cut. But more than anything else, I felt like I was working too far away from the mainstream world of architecture. And I felt like I wasn't really learning how buildings were built, which was still something that was close to my heart. And so I got an opportunity to work for a company called Heinges and Associates. They are one of the prominent building enclosure consultants or facade consultants. And I had already sort of started out learning about skins of buildings, working with fabrics. I had, that practice was very much where engineers and architects were together in the office, and we were sort of walking that line between architecture and engineering. And I said, well, I need to learn about more conventional construction, and I need to learn about building skins. So why not I start here and see what happens? And I was introduced to materials that I was completely unfamiliar with. Materials like glass, materials like aluminum, terracotta, things that we weren't even talking about all throughout our education in Ahmedabad. And so this sort of set me off into an interesting world, which was very exciting because there was a very steep learning curve, but it was also exciting because we were interacting with very prominent practices in New York City. So one of my first projects was the PATH terminal on World Trade Center. I worked on this project for over 4 years. And again, bringing me back into ground zero and the entire politics that was going on and trying to rebuild this thing and the evolution of the understanding of security, the impact of security requirements on architecture, and how do you deal with bomb blasts, and how do you deal with public spaces that might be under threat. So this was interesting. I spent many meetings in Calatrava office working with their team. It was frustrating for the most part. I worked with Polshek Partnership on this really lovely project on the mall in Washington, DC, which was a museum for news. It was really a front for a conservative think tank. I'm sure that they basically used to run lobbying activities from there, but basically it was a museum of news, and it has ceased to exist now. The building is, I think, being bought over by a university now, but it was one of the first projects where I drew the very first detail for these walls, and I saw it get built all the way, all the factory visits and all the site visits and everything. Another project that was very close to my heart is the Standard Hotel, which is on the High Line. It was one of the first building that went up on the High Line as High Line was getting built. And this building became notorious for all the voyeuristic activities that went on. I worked with Libeskind's office and designed the facades for these residential buildings in Singapore. This was my first experience working in Asia, and there was some travel to Asia, not a lot, but it was an exciting feeling to be connected somehow to the East, let us say. And then came this little monster. This was a project that came to us. An architect from Hong Kong reached out to my boss. My boss was very well known in Hong Kong and Singapore because he had spent many years working for IMPay, and he had built a lot in these areas. So he got invited to be a consultant, and this became the project where I first became a project manager. I spent maybe 2 years traveling back and forth to Macau. This is in Macau. I spent 2 years traveling back and forth to Macau at least once a month, if not two. I spent many weeks and weekends in small-time factories in southern China, learning how you quality control and how you ensure that what you're looking at is what you want to be looking at and stuff like that. But it was interesting. It was a real. I think this is the project where I really learned my trade to the most extent. And then there were a miscellany of other projects that did not go all the way. But this is just to show that I had started to spread a little bit in terms of getting a taste of the construction market that was outside of my immediate context. During this time, I got invited to start my first teaching assignment, which was at Pratt Institute. I was actually invited to teach the building enclosure component of a comprehensive architectural practice studio. And we would help students take entire buildings from idea concept level to sort of a DD level, where there would be a lot of detail about facades and structures and mechanical systems, etc. In any case, 2008, just before the crash happened, I was on this point. I was at this point in my life where I had spent about 5 years at Heinges. I had built a lot. I had learned a lot about facades. I was absolutely loving it. I felt like I could just keep doing facades for the rest of my life, but I felt like I had to reclaim the original idea, the original dream that I wanted to be an architect. And I had not even tried. I had not even worked at a mainstream architecture firm till then. I said, I have to try my hand out. I have to prove to myself that as I had, as I have learned of all of these things, this actually will contribute towards me becoming a better architect. So I found myself a practice, which was KPF, who were building in Asia, because I really wanted to keep working in Asia. I really did not want to work in New York City. It was a hell working in New York. The construction industry in New York is extremely stress-inducing, and I felt like I had to slowly find more and more comfort with understanding sort of the Asian point of view when it comes to. And I'm sort of generalizing it a little bit, but there still is like a big sort of cultural split. So I ended up joining KPF as a project manager, not really focused on facades, because they were very clear that they did not have specialists, and that I would come and I would have to just be one of the architects, and I was perfectly fine with that. And I ended up starting out on this project for one of, it was a headquarter for a real estate company in Hong Kong. And I think the reason why they let me have this project was that it was primarily about facades. There wasn't, it was core and shell. There wasn't much else to do in there. They're like, yeah, why don't you run this project and show us what you can do? And that sort of led me to another project in Hong Kong. So I ended up, between what I did at Heinges till everything that I did in KPF, I ended up traveling to Hong Kong and building there for about 8 years, continuously. Basically for 8 years, I was traveling to Hong Kong every 4 to 6 weeks. So lots and lots of flights, lots and lots of hotels, and getting projects built. And then came this Korea phase of my life, where I started. And this was a project that was very large. It was a very large team, and here I actually became the lead on the enclosure component of this. And this is in 2009, 2010, and this was when parametric architecture, Grasshopper, was breaking into the scene. I don't know if I hope some of you know what Grasshopper is. It's a plugin for Rhinoceros, which is another 3D modeling software. And this is where I broke my teeth with parametric design. I solved the geometrical complexity of this facade through Grasshopper, when Grasshopper was before its first edition came out. And then that sort of took me into another super tall tower in Korea, the tower for Hyundai Car Company. It was going to be their headquarters. This was never built, but this was a phenomenal project where we were designing for 12,000 people to come in and out of this building at the same time, because it's for the same company. And so to design a Class A office building that will cater to 12,000 people who are coming from 5 different ways of transport. And Hyundai had this a policy, which is not uncommon in Asia, even in China, where they provide meals to all their people. They provide lunch. So this building is not only an office building for 12,000 people, but it had to feed 12,000 people within 1 hour. So it was one of the largest sort of multi-level restaurants that you can imagine, which was all sort of interspersed into this tower. Of course, my focus was the building enclosure, but it was all sort of quite intricately connected. And the base of it was going to be this big museum for the Hyundai Car Company. Anyway, all through this, at some point, I found myself working on projects in Mumbai. I built this project in BKC, in Bandra Kurla Complex in Mumbai. That was, I think, KPF's first project in India. I was the project manager, but I also designed all the facades, and I worked with the Korean company that actually built the facades for this. I worked for Oberoi in Goregaon. We were designing 2 different buildings for them. I did some work in the West Coast in San Diego. And then, of course, Hudson Yards was a big KPF project. And even though I hesitated, I ended up working on the first tower of Hudson Yards. Hudson Yards, I have no hesitation in saying, is one of the ugliest projects to come about in New York City in a long time. But I had at least a very positive experience, learning experience, working on all these building enclosure systems. I was on this project for maybe 2.5 years, and this was sort of a rude welcome back to New York City. It was one of the most complex developments, the most complex political landscapes, most complex business architecture and construction landscapes. And we would have nightmarish meetings week after week trying to get this built. And then this was given to me for dealing with all that mess. KPF were the architects of record for Heatherwick for designing the vessel. And we had to babysit Heatherwick's office in developing the cladding concepts for this and developing the whole feasibility possibility of how this would be built. So that was sort of my last hurrah at KPF. This is now 2013, 2014. I have spent 6 years at KPF. I have worked as project manager. I have worked as job captain. I have worked as building enclosure lead. And I realized, and KPF had been very consistent in saying that they would not acknowledge my specialization in facades through a title that was that would allow me to practice that, and that I had to sort of become a project manager. And at that point, I felt like facades was too close to my heart, that I could not walk away from it and sort of train myself into a completely new skill. And I started looking for a, what had been interesting for me, having gone from a facade consulting practice to a high intensity practice like KPF, was that I had to teach myself a new vocabulary, right? Talking as a technical consultant to architects is a very different place than talking to young or very experienced architects as a colleague who wants to contribute to an early conversation of architecture, even though with all the vision you have of what could be problems down the line, of how one could strategize better so that we don't have problems down the line as we try to build these buildings. So I had to teach myself this new vocabulary and everything. So I had realized what role a specialist like me could play in an architectural firm, except that the role that KPF had for me was not great. So and this was also a time when I tried to found my own practice, and I spent 3 years actually running that practice with some friends who bailed out on me. And then the practice didn't go off. So I had to find another avenue. And that is when I approached Shop Architects. They were a young upcoming practice. They had just completed Barclays Center. And sorry, I did not mention this. In about 2013, while I was still at KPF, I was invited by one of the professors at Penn to come and teach at Penn. And he asked me to devise a seminar course that I would really like to teach. And so the course that I developed is called Material and Structural Intelligence, which is a course that I still teach. So I'm now in my 8th year of teaching this course at Penn. And this basically, for me, is sort of the core of what I consider to be my primary interest in architecture, which is the relationship between material, and by material I mean the craft of manipulating material, the working with finding architecture through a material process, and structural forces, and how knowledge of these can shape architectural form and how it can give meaning to architectural form. And I have felt over the years working closely with the construction industry, working closely within practice and then in academia, that architectural academia, especially in this part of the world, does focus a lot more on architectural ideas that are informed through sort of a myriad of socio-economic political forces. But there seems to be a little bit of a blind spot when it comes to understanding the evolution of form as it relates to the physical nature of its being, right? It's coming to be as well as its being. And for me to go to Penn, where I had first learned these ideas, and Peter McCleary, my professor, is long gone by this point. So no one at Penn is talking about the craft and the materiality and the idea of architecture as derived through an understanding of its physical existence. It became sort of quite satisfying to go there and sort of reintroduce the ideas that students that I had learned over there. And so this is a seminar course that I teach where it is primarily focused on physical modeling using materials. There's no 3D printing allowed. There is no no CNC machining allowed. They have to build structurally active models at all times. Every model is a structurally active model, and they have to evolve architecture through, they have to evolve a form, find a purpose for it, find a meaning in its context, find a context for it, a program for it, etc. But the starting point is a material and a form arrived at through a structural understanding of manipulating that material. So, so this was sort of a little side note. So, and while I'm doing this, I'm still teaching at Pratt. So my life got sort of split: fall semesters in one school and spring semesters in another school. And I would always teach 1 day a week, half a day a week, really. And my employers would allow me to do that. So then comes 2014, and I approached shop architects.
Sorry, Samir Bhai.
Yes.
We need to move to the question and answers, if you can.
Okay, I will quickly go through this.
Yeah, sorry about that.
So at shop, I ended up joining as a director of enclosure design, where I basically crafted a position that was close to my heart. And I ended up participating. I am still here, and I have been here for about 7 years. I am participating in every project that happens in the office, and I train students, and I train my colleagues. I materialize the ideas that come out of our practice. This is a project that is almost complete in Botswana. This is another project in New York City that we completed recently. The Uber headquarters in San Francisco. The first Fulbright University, which is going to be built in Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam, is one of my projects. This mixed-use tower, 2 towers actually connected on the top in Melbourne, is my project. This new headquarters in Sydney for Atlassian, a tech company, is my project. It's going to be the tallest timber tower. And then we're doing a whole host of embassies. This is the US Embassy in Honduras that is under construction, the new embassy in Bangkok under construction, consulate in Milan. And then I do a host of other experimental research work in materials, especially terracotta. This was an installation that we did in Milan, another research project in Buffalo. So, and in 2015, I started teaching at Princeton, where I teach a course in building enclosures. So sorry for being long-winded. That's me, my daughter, and my wife. We live in New York City. That's it. Sorry for being long-winded.
That's okay. We were just running out of time. Sorry
Yeah,
for
absolutely.
interrupting. Oh, thank you so much, Samir Bhai, for sharing. And as you mentioned in the beginning about all the three experiences of all the speakers being so different and how zooming in, I think your journey was also very interesting. And the work you do reminds me of a project we did with Professor Rajay. We worked on the facade itself. So it was really interesting. And thank you so much for sharing your journey with us. And now we would do we will have a poll question for all the participants, and it should be on your screen. You'll be given a few minutes. Kindly select, you can select more options, multiple options, more than one. And
So Shakti, can you see we are right now sharing poll results?
okay, it's great. It's shared by everybody. So as you can all see, most of the people would prefer, it's almost 50-50, but yeah, most of the people would prefer once a quarter for social interactions. And so people are more willing to do social interactions than the professional ones. I think they have enough professional interactions with the colleagues and every day. So oh, thank you so much for sharing your, and we'll ask, Vatsalbhai, should we ask the other question now or after some time, after the question and
We'll do
answers?
it after a few minutes. Now you can take audience Q&A. Thank you.
Okay. So if all the people would like to ask any questions to our speakers, you can post it in the chat and we will ask it to them one by one. And or we can unmute you and you can ask them yourself. Whatever is comfortable to you.
Our question for Gandhi, Kautilya, is how difficult it is to learn the Scandinavian languages. Unmute yourself.
Kautilbhai, you're on mute. Please unmute yourself. Thank you.
But it is like any language, it is not very easy. And I'm not a guy who learned methodically language. I cannot learn it through learning grammar and all that. I just have to talk to people. I just have to kind of be with them. And very unlike my wife, she came in also to Norway from Mumbai, and she came a year, 2 years after me. But she was much better at picking up the language because she learned methodically, and she would remember grammar and all those things. I took some time, but it took about, I would say, about 3 to 4 years to kind of really express. And then I was also working on projects as well. So my official language was phenomenal. Like I could write letters, official letters, and all those things. And then while working on Yard, I was also a project manager. So I was controlling 200 to 300 people on site on Yard. At times, also the legal aspects, the cultural, like changed the way of working, etc. So a command on language was important, but I mean, I was forced into it, and it was interesting. And I think I would say it takes some time, but uh, it's very difficult to, for different people, would take different time to learn a language. Yeah.
So I do have a question for actually all three of you. This might not be so much for you, Kautilya Bhai, but like living here in US or any other country, right? Like US, we need a license to practice architecture if you want to be called yourself an architecture. So how early or how soon did you guys get your licenses? I don't know about Scandinavia or Norway. So if you can just let us know a little bit about that, like how different processes there are in all the different countries.
Speaking for myself, I got my license in 1992 as quickly as I could. And, I didn't wait. Because the degree from Ahmedabad is recognized in the United States, so the 2 years of work experience I had in Mumbai counted towards my professional development, right? So the internship, the IDP process, it recognized those 2 years. So 1 year into working at WRT, I had 3 years and I was able to write the exam. And I did it as quickly as possible.
That's good.
And then I followed up with others. I have my planner license and all that stuff. And then the NCARB registration, which was interesting because I did my NCARB registration little later when I started doing international practice and I needed when I moved to Atlanta. So at that time, I didn't realize that the 1 year post-professional degree I did at Penn was not a professional degree. I had no idea. So in order to get my NCARB file, I had to go back to Ahmedabad. And I wrote to the registrar saying, I'm doing my NCARB. They want the curriculum from 1980. And they had it. They sent it. I was just stunned. It was amazing how quickly and easily that process worked with Ahmedabad.
I agree. I mean, I had in Norway, it was relatively easier because they asked a few questions and then I had to appear in the test and I had some interviews, etc. But I was always working with an architectural firm and then it was a little bit easier. But after 20 years in Norway, when I came to Canada, that was a tough thing to get a license in Canada. Yeah. Because it was a time in between. Like I was talking to people who had come 10, 15 years before me, and it was not very complicated to get the license at that time. Now, again, it is not very difficult to get a license in Canada currently because if you have worked for 6 or 7 years or whatever it counts, and then you just have to take an exam in ethics. But exactly when I came, I had to appear for these 9 exams in NCARB, and then I had to do something. So my first project actually, which I designed an apartment building, I could not stamp my own drawings. I had a friend who stamped my drawings. So it was not easy. But I got my license. So I came to 2001 and I got my license. For 2 years when I worked offshore, I didn't need an architectural license because no one understood what I was doing. But then it took me another 2 years to get. So I got my license in 2004 when I had to start working, building houses and homes.
Wow.
I have a, hello, I'm Jinraj. Is Samir there?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Samir, first of all, I want to say the Anish Kumar and Kautilya, your journeys are fascinating. And Mr. Gandhi, I was late in joining, so I'm going to see the whole, I'll see the video again to all three of you because your fascinating work, Samir could not do justice within the time. But Samir, there is something that I want to tell you in defense of the CEPT institution. I studied between 66 and 72. All the principles you talked about, compression to tension and heavy weight to light and all those concepts were taught to us. And CEPT education is not about feeding you how to design a facade in a New York City. it just gives you an exercise in thinking. Each studio is an exercise in thinking. You are taught how to think in a given situation of whatever materials are there. Then you take off from there and do whatever you want to do anywhere in the world, because you are trained to analyze, think, solve problems. It is not about how to design a building in Sahara Desert or in Eskimo land or it's in the New York City. So that way I defend the architectural education very much. And in my time between 66 and 72, I designed structures which were tensile. My final year thesis had many examples of kinetic architecture. It was known as architecture as a system open to information and energy in 1972. That means it was possible to do whatever you wanted to do with all the knowledge and context at that time, and the faculty were open. Maybe at your time in 93, you didn't have those faculty, but if I tell you the Wasauda is expert in tensile structure, he worked under Fry Otto, he went to Germany. There are many other people who have worked in American practices, and even American practice at that time was not very technologically advanced. We are talking about 60s. All these technologies came now because advances in software engineering and engineering technology and in physics. You could not have had those kind of material technology in 93 or 66. So I want to defend the architectural education. You have to learn how to go into the whatever context and solve it. And that's what all this career of Anish Kumar and Mr. Gandhi, even yours, that you did a fantastic work in this using your brain, not your education at CEPT. But CEPT taught you how to think.
Thanks for bringing that up, Jinraj Bhai. I completely agree with you. And if I were not sitting in a group of people from CEPT, I would probably not share what I shared, right? Because the reason why I am here amongst this esteemed group of people is because I consider what I learned at CEPT to be the prime ingredient of who I am. And everything that came in my life afterwards, I was able to do it. And in many cases, I was able to excel at it because of the extremely strong foundation at CEPT. It goes without saying that CEPT is where I learned to think. It goes without saying that CEPT is where the foundations of value, my value system entirely come from there. And I think that the humanity, the focus on understanding sort of the impact that our humanity has on our built environment is squarely from there. I also have no hesitation in telling you that my education, that the academics that I find in many of these institutions where I teach is not as good as what we did at CEPT. The students coming out do not have sometimes the right skills, they do not have sometimes the right mindset, etc. So I would not disagree at all with what you say. But just to sort of reframe what I said then, in the year 2000, the world, the technology that was being employed in terms of building high performance complex structures was not being taught at CEPT, right? It was not. And I remember I learned AutoCAD at CEPT. I learned AutoCAD release 10, release 12 at CEPT under Anant Raje. But when I came to RPI in 2007 and I went back, I campaigned to have a computer lab for us because there was no computer lab for students. And I ended up going up against Anant Raje, who was the leader of computer lab, who was dead against having more computers for students, right? So I had at least the benefit of having Worky on my side, who agreed that it would be good for students to have a few extra computers. And we fought, believe me, we fought to have 3 computers for a student body that was 1,500. And I had just come from, a place where, I don't know, there was just no count of computers in an educational institute. But again, it is not about, I mean, I love everything that I got at CEPT. I consider it to be core to who I am.
Thank you, Samir. Wonderful. And I like what you gave an example of computer. Suresh, I'll just come in 1 minute. Sometimes people who teach something, they want to have the monopoly, and they don't want to duplicate the knowledge because Anant Raje, whoever, I've never met him, he must be the monopoly in Ahmedabad and getting his own architectural practice of using AutoCAD. In each student learning more with his own computer becomes a competitor. So it's unfortunate in life. Sometimes this happens. I'm sorry. Forgive me if that is
no, please.
That is not the truth. Anant Raja should forgive me because that's not. But I have seen in my example, people tend to have a monopolistic attitude in order to keep the monopoly with themselves. Suresh, please go ahead.
Raj, I'll come back to you, but let me start with, interesting to know that you say that we have to need a license. In UK, we don't say we need a license to practice architecture. We say we have to be registered. Now, it'd be interesting for many of you that CEPT University was once recognized by RIBA. It was let go by the faculty. And the reason being, because the faculty had to do a lot of homework to prove that the CEPT curriculum was up to RIBA standard, which is unfortunate because I come across so many young CEPTians coming to UK and they find it very difficult to get into registration process. That is one part of very interesting to know that you call it license and we call it registration. Look, CEPT opened us to think differently. Any institute cannot forecast what the new technology is going to be there. And we talk about monopoly. Everyone has a right for a monopoly. Everyone has a right of their own thinking and a process. So that's a totally different issue. Each faculty member will be thinking in a different way, will be passing on the knowledge in whatever they may be perceiving that what should be imparted to the students. So that's fine. But I definitely applaud all 3 of you who presented. I wish that a time will come that we can document all this thing into a book format. Because I've always been saying the amount of knowledge we have collectively is so tremendous and so vast. Have you ever thought that only the Asian countries have professionals who work all around the world? It's not true for many Western professionals. Of course, it has happened, but we tend to work in almost all part of the world. Now, imagine the amount of that wealth of knowledge taking back to CEPT and showing them what is out there in the world. Now, that is what I find it very interesting about us coming together, and I hope we will be able to do it one day. And that what will inspire the younger generation coming out of India and then settling down in India and taking forward. Most of the time when I go to India, they always tell me, how come you have all these things happening and all these things done properly outside? I said, you people forget one thing. Most of us, we are from CEPT out there. So the only problem I find that thing doesn't happen in India is that all of you have a lot of obligations. And you all understand what I mean, obligation. Okay? The day the obligation goes away, the day the Chalta attitude changes, we should be leading the world in almost all the technology area, because there is tremendous brain power there. Okay? And I think through this dialogue and all these things, we will be able to convey these messages back, because many of you do travel back and forth. And maybe I mentioned this thing a few weeks back, that maybe we as a group should go and offer a winter school at CEPT and say, look, here we are as an alumni group, we're going to offer a winter school for all of you. And I think that will be the I'll say the peak us for us as an alumni group, because look at the experience you have from Anish, from Samir, from Kartalya. Who can benefit of that type of a knowledge in CEPT? No one, no other institute. I bet that. Even in UK, I know that it is not possible. And I think I really enjoy this professional talks. I mean, I'm learning every day whenever I'm here. So thank you, all of you.
If I might just add something to that, I think that what was most interesting for me in this group, and there are many alumni groups, right? I mean, they're all over. But what you have created, Vatsal and others, is a group that has a lot of the younger alumni. I had no idea that there were so many people from CEPT, because at the time I went to CEPT, there was just School of Architecture and there was School of Planning. That's it. SPST started while I was there. Now it is so big. And at the time I came here, there must have been like 3 or 4 people from Ahmedabad, or 5 maybe. And now there are so many. And I would love to find a way for us to help the people who are coming in now settle into their lives here, because it's not so easy. The story, as we say it in a linear way, makes it all seem so easy and automatic, right? You move from one job to the other, but there's a lot of heartache, there's a lot of work, there's a lot of struggle that is associated with it. And you heard some of that from Samir, of the struggles with getting the right title, getting recognition, having your name be put on things. So if there's a way in which we as a group can help the younger people, mentor them to find their feet in the way in which we have been able to, or maybe even better, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, thank you, Anish bhai.
Absolutely true.
That is one of the goals of CEPT Alumni Association. So, Jinraj bhai, if you can hold your question for the social hour, our event was 1.5 hours, and we are over with that, and now we are hogging on to our social hour. So we would love to continue the discussion, but before that, we will just have another poll question for all of you. If you would like to answer that, Vatsal bhai, can you please post the poll question? Yeah, the question is, CEPT Alumni Association would be more relevant to me if what all it did, and what do you think? Provide a social space, professional networking, symbolic connection back to CEPT, discussions about CEPT policies and campus affairs, space to discuss, debate current and relevant issues, facing our community in North America, or interact with people with my regional area.
I'm keeping it open 10 more seconds for additional people to chime in. Thank you. We have 19 out of 23.
Great.
Oh.
We are done with the poll is closed, and you can all see the results of the poll on the screen. And everybody wants to connect to, most of the people want to connect to CEPT Alumni Association because it's a social space to meet other than in our community, and which is what we are all doing right now. Professional networking opportunity is 79%, and very few people are interested in policies and campus affairs as we are away from the campus. Yeah.
Thank you, Shakti. I think we can continue with the discussion going on.
Yeah, we can continue with the discussion, and you guys are welcome to grab a drink and we can continue our social hour, which is informal. And thank you everyone for joining us. And maybe Vatsal bhai, do we stop recording now?
I think we can continue this dialogue going on, and
Okay.
we'll continue the recording for now.
Yes, Jinraj bhai.
Yeah, I would like request that this professional opportunity are very important. I would like to connect with Anish Kumar and Kautilya Gandhi through email and phone call, if you don't mind, Anish Kumar.
No, not at all. Of course.
No, absolutely, Dinraj.
Absolutely.
Okay. The second thing,
We are here, all of us.
okay.
Judge, now let me remind you something. You had promised to do something last time.
I have selected about 5 topics. Okay. And I'm going to share it tomorrow with the organizers. Shakti, I don't have your email address. Please send it to me somehow.
Yeah,
And I will copy you, Suresh, about the topic. I want, Vatsal, we should ignore this poll result because they are not even statistical sample. They are just 25 people. We are more than 100 people there. So this is not an opinion of the whole group. And if you just do professional every quarter, that means 4 alumni every quarter. We generate 50 alumni every year. Okay, so we should have it every month because listening to these stories, I'm so fascinated. I'm prepared to spend time, listen to these stories. So ignore this poll and have it every
Indra, you are retired, others are working.
I am not retired. I told you before, I'm not even tired. I'm not even tired.
The way you spend time on social media, it seems you are
This
retired.
is not the social media. I want to look at the professional part of it. I'm not talking about social.
I think what
Suresh,
don't meeting, because meeting every
don't
month
continue the 60s things here. Let's have other younger people to talk.
Yeah.
Let's have the other younger people to talk. Suresh and Jinraj. Okay, please. Let this other younger generation to
Shalin, are you listening?
kind their opinion.
Younger generation, very Shalin.
Yeah.
None of them are on video.
Hi, Suresh bhai. I can listen to you, bhai.
I'm listening to
Hi.
Anish Kumar, Kautilya Gandhi, and Samir Kumar sound like going through architectural time machine. You know.
Shalin, everyone waiting to hear from you.
Definitely, I enjoyed the talk today, and everyone did share their stories, and it was very fascinating to hear different parts of the world. And then everyone had each one had a unique story about. Someone had a very pragmatic approach to architecture, and someone had a very sort of fascinating storytelling way of architecture. And I think